my project was on Logan Canyon potential cell tower installation. It's a view shed analysis. So let me set the scene for you. Logan Canyon lies in northern Utah in the Bear River Mountains in the Cache National Forest. And Highway 89 runs through the canyon. There's about a 39-mile long section of Highway 89 that runs through the canyon. And if you don't know, Highway 89 is a major trucking route. It runs from Canada all the way down to Mexico, so there's a lot of traffic on that road. Additionally, the canyon does connect Cache Valley and Bear Lake Valley. And Cache Valley is a college community. Bear Lake Valley is a vacation destination. So there's a lot of travel back and forth between those locations. And on top of that, the canyon itself is also a place to go and visit. There's lots of camping and hiking and horseback riding. There's even a family-owned ski resort in the canyon. So it's a pretty busy place. And I myself, who have lived on either side of this canyon, I've driven up and down the canyon countless times. I know it quite intimately. So you may be asking yourself, why am I bringing this up? What does this matter? Well, you see, Logan Canyon does have its own hazards. It does have its fair share of problems, especially and most predominantly in the winters and springs when we have lots of snow. There's ice on the road that makes conditions very slick. And so it's almost every year, it seems like somebody slides off the road and barrels into the river below. In fact, it's quite common. I have a family member a few years ago actually helped rescue a family that had gotten stuck in an upturned car in the river during the winter. So it is not unheard of. And there are other hazards as well. I mean, avalanches, rock slides. I mean, obviously you could hit an animal like a deer. People have gone missing up the canyon. So I mean, you can imagine you got this 40-mile long canyon, you get stuck in the middle of it, some problem, maybe your car breaks down or something. The closest, or maybe you hit an animal or whatever, the closest hospital is 20 miles away. I mean, that's 20 miles for the ambulance to get to you and 20 miles back. I mean, and that's if they know about you immediately. You really are at the mercy of a good Samaritan. So on top of all of these problems, there is no cell phone service in the entire canyon. If you look at this screenshot of a map I took from coveragemap.com, the purple areas indicate places of cell service. Logan Canyon is right in the middle of that, and there is no cell phone service whatsoever. So my solution to this problem is installing cell phone towers to help mitigate these eventualities. So the goal of this project, again, is to find optimal number of cell towers, their locations, and their heights to provide service for Highway 89. Now, to reach this goal, there are a few questions that need to be answered. Obviously, one of the questions is where are the cell tower locations? Another one is how tall are those towers? And then also, what are the building requirements for towers? You can't build a tower on a cliff. That just doesn't make any sense. So we need to find the areas and adequate slopes possibly for these towers. The techniques, I can look at former research done on similar projects to see what people have done, what data have they used, what methodologies have they used, and maybe I can follow something like that. And then at the end of my analysis, what is a cost-benefit analysis looking at what would be the optimal height, what would be the optimal location for these towers, and then maybe at the end looking at my methodology and seeing how I can improve upon it. So before we do an analysis, let's quickly talk about how cell phone towers work. Cell phones and cell towers use radio waves. The radio waves are fairly weak, but just like any other form of wave, like visible light waves or sound waves, when they are emitted, they are strongest when they are in a straight line or a line of sight. Now, it doesn't mean that it can't bounce off objects, through reflection or refraction through the atmosphere, but when that happens, the signal strength does decrease. So this has to be accounted for when performing a viewshed analysis, especially in a place like Logan Canyon with difficult topography. And when we want to place cell phone towers, we want to put them in a place where they have where their direct line of sight is predominant, so we can utilize that to the max. Looking at former research done on similar topics, I found an interesting pattern where the research fell into one of two categories. Either their study areas were in rural locations or their study areas were in urban locations. If it was in a rural location, it was typically large areas. like counties or regions. And the data they used was a digital elevation model. And what they were trying to do was build upon an already existing telecommunication system. And their view sheds, their methods were simple view sheds. Whereas in urban locations, typically like cities or oftentimes college campuses, because the buildings were tall and close together, a digital elevation model or a DEM just didn't quite cut it. It wasn't detailed enough. So they resorted to using LiDAR, and they built 3D models using that LiDAR. And they did perform viewshed analyses, but they also worked with reflection analyses and refraction analyses to really get an accurate look at where cell phone signals could reach. And the reason I bring up this dichotomy is that Logan Canyon is kind of a weird combination of both of these. It is a rural location. There aren't a ton of buildings. It is a large area, but because of its complex topography, with cliffs and being in a national forest, there are tall trees, and especially at the bottom of the canyon where we are interested in, because that's where the highway is, these trees and these cliffs kind of act as like tall buildings in an urban environment. So when performing an analysis, you want to take that into account. You want to try to incorporate those methodologies. Other factors that came into these former research, signal attenuation. Some people accounted for signal all the way out until signal loss, while others cut it off at a certain threshold, saying, like, hey, we understand that signals may continue, but even at a certain point, your cell phone just can't do anything with this weak signal. And others also accounted for the construction areas of cell phone towers. You can't have them on a slope steeper than 10%. They need to have a minimum square footage of 1,000 square feet. You also need to have easy access for maintenance. And I built a lot of this off of the Cache County zoning laws for cell towers that I was able to find. So using these methodologies, I was able to build upon my own methodology. So speaking of that, this is an outline of my methodology. You can see my model on the left. I had two data inputs. Basically, I had a DEM and I had a highway polyline. And from that, I was able to create a viewshed mask, which I will get into later. And then I performed a few viewshed analyses to find out the location of towers and then their individual viewsheds. So moving on to my digital elevation model, it was a 10-meter resolution DEM that I got from Earth Explorer, and I merged those two rasters together. And I also had to reproject the DEMs to get a vertical datum so that a viewshed could be performed. Next, I was able to find a highway polyline, and I extracted the section that only ran through the canyon. But then I noticed that the highway polyline from the datum I had gotten before was for a small scale map, and it didn't quite match the highway. As you can see in this image on the right, it's the yellow line. So I had to readjust the vertices so that it more closely aligned with where the highway actually was, and that would give me more accurate viewshed analysis later on. And to reduce my processing time, I also cut down my raster using a buffer that I created from this highway. That way it wouldn't, when running a viewshed later, it wouldn't be calculating, cells way out there. Just, we need the stuff immediately around the highway, which can't be seen. Once that data was collected, I moved on to creating a viewshed mask. So here's that buffer that I was talking about before, the DEM behind it, everything in the blue is what I will be using later on. So the viewshed mask, I wanted to incorporate the requirements to build a cell phone tower. So, again, less than 10% slope in areas that were greater than 1,000 square feet. So using that clipped DEM that I created, I asked the computer to create a slope raster, which this map here on the right shows all the areas in the canyon and their slopes. And then I asked it to single out areas that were slopes of 10% or less. And then from that, I was able to extract areas that were also 1,000 square feet or bigger. So the resulting map is this. So everything in green is, shall we say, it's the right building construction area for a cell phone tower. It's 10% slope or less, and it's 1,000 square feet or bigger. So using that, I can start performing a viewshed analysis. So the viewshed analysis first started from the road. I needed to see what areas from the road can be seen. So those would indicate a good location to start building towers. And those areas would only be in that viewshed mask. So my inputs were my digital elevation model, my highway polyline, and that viewshed mask. I also incorporated heights from the Cache County cell tower zoning laws, which I'll show in a second. So each height was accounted for, and then I would later turn those around and perform viewshed analyses. This is the result of one of those viewshed analysis. It's just a ground view. As you can see, the yellow areas on this map. So we have the digital elevation model in the background. You have the highway polyline running through it. The yellow areas indicate areas that were seen from the road, but not too many places. Whereas deeper colors like red, orange, and red were seen more regularly from the highway. In fact, the highest value, if you look at the legend on the left, is 53, which means it was seen at least 53 times from the highway. This helped me narrow down the locations where towers could be placed. I opened up the attribute table, identified the cells with the highest values, and I came up with these two locations. Now, I could have found a third or fourth or fifth tower location, but those location values were so low that they wouldn't have added any meaningful coverage to the road. So I decided that two towers was sufficient enough to move on with the next analysis. So we have tower 1 with the highest value of 53, and then tower 2, which is a little bit further north, deeper into the canyon, with I think it was a value of like 46. I can't remember off the top of my head. And then again, these are the heights that I chose because I was basing them off the Cache County zoning laws for cell towers. And instead of doing an analysis for each individual height, I just decided to do it in increments of 30, and then from 30 to 150 feet, and then adding the two outliers of 350 feet for a final analysis. So once those locations had been determined, I reversed the viewshed analysis and started doing it from the individual heights of those towers that had been chosen. Here is a map of one of those view sheds of the 30-foot towers. Everything you see in red is what tower 1 can see. Everything in blue is what tower 2 can see. And then everything that's purple is what they both can see. And then here's a composite map of all the potential tower heights. Red is, again, what the 30-foot towers can see, and then the lighter colors is the higher the tower. And as you can notice, there isn't really much gain the taller the towers get, which is interesting. And what's more important isn't the area they cover, but how much of the road it covers. So performing a viewshed analysis, this is kind of the data that I got. You have the left column showing the different heights of all the towers. The second column is identifying, is it tower 1 or tower 2? And then segment length is how much of the road is actually covered by that tower, and then the percentage of the road that is also covered by that tower. And again, as you notice, even though we are having 30 feet of increase per tower, it's not even increasing the percentage of the road by 1%. Now, so if you were to ask me what is my recommendation for installing cell phone towers, there are obviously other factors that go into determining tower locations and heights. But my recommendation for a low-cost solution is installing 30-foot towers. Combined, they cover about approximately 30% of the canyon road, while a tower that is 12 times the height, the 350-foot tower, only covers approximately 38% of the road, which, is only an 8% difference. And to further nail that in, here's a map of the road that is covered. The red indicates where the 30-foot towers can cover, and then the lighter the color, the taller the tower. And again, there's not much change over this area. So that was my initial analysis. Upon reflecting on this analysis, there are some things I can change, adding LiDAR to detect where trees are, or using reflection analysis to get around trees, or, cliffs, or maybe there are regions of the canyon deeper down that a direct line of sight can't reach. Using this can help improve a viewshed analysis. And then for alternative solutions, maybe this isn't the best solution. You can see a future where Starlink or technologies like that are more ubiquitous, where they can use Starlink to reach places where telecommunication towers are not conventional. Or if you want a more low-cost solution, installing emergency telephones every couple of miles is also an easier and cheaper way of doing it. But I think that if you want an effective way to approach this problem, I think that if with well planning and research, a low and a cost-effective solution to this problem would be to install a couple of cell phone towers within Logan Canyon. Thank you for your time. Are there any questions?